Hello everyone, and welcome to this next video in the Houdini Academy Foundation module. In this video, I'll quickly address the changes that happened between Houdini 18.5 and 19, so you don't get stuck on the differences when you're following my video course. Now, there aren't many changes, but there are a couple of notable bugs right now in Houdini 19, especially in the Houdini engine, that I need to address. And next to that, there's also a difference with the curve swap that we need to cover. As you can see here, I also have a version 1.1 of the example files ready. Now these files are available from my website. Now if you've already downloaded the previous example files, I will have sent you an email with a new download link, and you can get it from there. If you've just started with the foundation module, then it's likely you just received version 1.1 already. So you should be getting this file. And in this file, you will find the example files tool, which is installed from the HDA right here. And also a couple of baked out example buildings with some unique textures which weren't present in the original example files. So there's some new goodies here, and of course feel free to check it out right now if you download the version 1.1 example files. And just to point it out, these files were created in Houdini 18.5, then they were upgraded to Houdini 19 at the end of the foundation module, but in order to make them compatible with both the previous version and the current version of Houdini, I've backported them back to Houdini 18.5. And this is important because if I hadn't done that, you would only be able to run them in the Houdini 19 version of the Houdini engine. Right now these files are compatible for both the Houdini 18.5 and Houdini 19 version of Houdini, so if you want to go back to 18.5, you can do so. You can use these files with Houdini 18.5. But okay, without further ado, let's have a look at what we can do with these new example files. We'll do a quick recap on how to install them. Then we'll have a look at the differences between the new version of Houdini and the old one and how we can work with that. And then we'll have a look at the bugs that have been introduced with Houdini 19, specifically within the Houdini engine, and how we can get around that. And then finally, I want to cover one last time how you can configure the Houdini engine to find your utility files, your Houdini HDAs, that aren't loaded into your scene directly. Because if that isn't clear for you and you run into issues where your tool doesn't work, I just want to make sure you understand properly how this works, how the OTL Scanpath or search path in Unreal works, so that you don't have any problems loading the tool. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Now, if you've downloaded the version 1.1 example files, then the installation process is pretty much the same as what we've done in the previous video. However, just as a reminder, in here you will find two folders. One is for the Houdini project and one is for the Unreal project. So it's the same as before. If you go in here, you will find your HIP file, which is a indie file, and then you will also find the HDAs over here. You will find the textures included with the Houdini scene and the geometry files, which you'll need in order to put the ventilation objects on the roof of our building. But as an added bonus, I've also added the commercial version of the asset and the HIP file as well. So if you have a commercial license version of Houdini and you want to open these files for yourself, then you can use these right here. Now, since I've already explained in the previous video how to install the example file, I'll keep this brief. All you really have to do is go to Houdini, open up your HIP file. That could either be the indie license file, or if you have a commercial version of Houdini, the commercial HIP file. And then once you have that, you need to set the project that this hip file is in. So go to set project, select the main folder, not the commercial version project folder, but the main folder. Click accept, and then install the HDAs. So go to Houdini Digital Assets under import, and then select the digital assets that match your version of Houdini. So if you're loading the indie version, the HIP LC file, make sure you load the HDA LC files. Otherwise, if you load the commercial version, make sure you load the HDA files. Now, just as a reminder, if you were to load the indie license versions of the assets or the scene file into a commercial license of Houdini, then it will convert it down to a indie license session. And anything you save at that point will be saved out or overwritten into a indie license file. Just keep that in mind, okay? Don't go and load the indie license files if you're working with a commercial version of Houdini. It will save you a lot of headache. Anyway, if you've installed those files into your scene, then everything should be fine. So let's go ahead and have a look at what's different in Houdini 19. Alright, so at this point we have our tool loaded in Houdini 19, and as far as I'm aware, everything came over properly. Nothing should have broken here. I mean, we can quickly test out some of its settings, make sure that nothing broke, but overall, as far as I'm aware, the tool should be functioning just the same as it did in Houdini 18.5. Now, that is not to say that there aren't any changes in Houdini 19 that you might want to become aware of. I'm not going to name all of the changes in this video. However, if a new version of Houdini comes along, some nodes are often updated, and in this case also some of the interface elements have also been changed. The interface in Houdini 19 looks slightly different, but you shouldn't get lost in this. Next to that, another thing that's been changed is the curve node. Now over here we still have the original curve node from Houdini 18.5. However, if you try to drop down a new curve node, notice how it is quite different. And that's because they have actually included a lot of new functionality in the curve SOP. And this particular version is called 2.0. Now, if I start drawing with this curve SOP, you get this nice menu here on the left, which is set up with Python viewer states. And they're all pre-configured, so you don't have to worry about that. But basically, if you start clicking in the screen, you can start drawing like before. But the moment you drag and hold, you can also create some nice curvature, for example, which could be an interesting usage of the curve node, right? We could make more interesting buildings. However, this particular building tool was not designed to work with that feature. So how do we go back to the old curve tool if we don't want this kind of behavior? Well, it's actually really simple. All you have to do is right-click on any node, go to Show in Asset Manager. This will bring up the operator menu and show you the node. And then under Configuration, make sure that the Asset Definition toolbar is set to Show Always. If you have that turned on, then on your asset, if there is another version available, you can find these two bars up here. And the one on the left allows you to grab any other version of the node that comes under the same node definition name. So in this case, the curve node is actually called curve 2.0 because it's been updated. If you want to get the old curve node back, its old behavior back, just switch it over to curve. And if you do that, then, well, for one, whatever curve you had here will have disappeared. However, we can now use it just like before, and we get that string back. But okay, I just wanted to quickly show you that. Basically, any node that's been updated with a new version of Houdini is actually still there. Basically, any node that it comes with Houdini proper, so not the Labs toolkit, but the main toolset in Houdini, will be backwards compatible and generally is supported properly over multiple versions, which means that I could still load assets from older versions of Houdini, and most of the time They only require minor fixes to stay functional. Now, if you're using Houdini 19, it might very well be possible you don't want to use the old curve node. Now, I did create the course and the videos in Houdini 18.5, so you are going to see me using this curve sop when we need to. However, if you want to use the new version, then let me quickly explain to you how to use it. Now, there are a couple of differences between these two. First, the new curve node has a different interface. It doesn't have the coordinate string, which describes where every point is in our curve, but it can actually support multiple sets of curves at the same time. So I could click and draw and then press enter, and every time I do that, I create a new curve. The old curve node could not do that. So the new curve sop has that capability, and that can be useful. However, my tool doesn't support, or at least hasn't been built with this capability in mind. So in our case, if we use the curve 2.0, we should strive to only draw one curve, not multiple. However, with this curve node, it's actually really easy to draw multiple curve objects by accident. So if you want to add to an existing curve, instead of starting a new one, you actually have to click on one of the endpoints of that curve, and then it will allow you to continue drawing. If you connect two endpoints, it will turn into a surface. Okay, this becomes a closed curve. And finally, if you want to add a point in the middle of a curve, you can press Ctrl, and this will then snap to that curve, and then we can click and place a new point on that curve without starting a new one. Okay, so now we know how to draw with this tool. Let's have a look at how we can remove or move existing points, because in our current mode we're only drawing. If you want to edit your curves, you can do that using the edit mode over here. The hotkey for that is F, and drawing mode is G, so you can easily switch with your keyboard. And this will allow you to select your points, and then you can delete them, for example. Or we can select them, and then we can move them. So if you grab a point and drag and hold, then you can move it around. But if you want some more control over this, you can also use the widget. So if you press the K button, it will bring up a widget, and then you can move it around or snap it to one of the elements in your screen. If we press the buttons here on the left, or we hold the X key and we select, for example, grid snapping, then we can now snap to our grid. So we have the capability to draw very precise lines, or potentially snap them in a specific axis. You can do that by grabbing one of these directions and then just dragging. Okay, so that's the basics of this. Now, do be aware that if you're working with the curve node, you're basically manipulating an internal cache of data in the curve sop. So if you try to select any of these curves here using the standard selection tool, not using the widget handle, but the selection tool, you're actually selecting what comes out of this node, not what's inside the node. So if I go over here and I try to select my points, and I try to delete those with the standard selection handle, I will instead create a blast node. Or if I try to move them, I will create an edit node. So in this case, we're actually manipulating the data coming out of this asset, not what's inside of it. If you want to edit what's inside of the curve sop, you have to use the handle tool in edit mode. And then you can just manipulate this all you want. So just now, when I created a couple of points and then I connected the last point to the first one, I ended up creating a surface, right? Now, if you don't want that and you want to keep it as a curve, then you can also disconnect one of these points, split it basically, to get rid of the surface and just keep a single curve that starts and ends in the same location but isn't actually connected. Then it won't create that surface. If you want to do that, you can use the edit mode. Select the point where you want to disconnect your curve, and then either click on this button here to split it, or hold the C key for the radial menu, and then you can select split right here. And this will have split our curve in such a way that we can now select one of the points here and move them. So we basically just have a disconnected curve with a start and an end that happen to coincide in the same place. Now if you end up splitting your curve like this, your point numbers can get a bit mixed up. However, this doesn't really affect the curve. It still exists with a start and an end. We'll cover more about how curves work and how their vertices affect how they are constructed, because if we look at this curve with their vertice numbers, they are sequenced from the start to the end. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. Now don't worry too much about vertice numbers or point numbers. If you've watched the introduction video, you might understand what I'm talking about. If you don't, we're gonna cover this in the upcoming videos, so we'll get to it. Now if you want to take this surface and you want to flip it upside down, then you can also do that by selecting these points and then selecting reverse, and that will flip your surface right side up in this case. Now so far we've been using this curve node here in polygon mode, but if you create a new curve swap, it actually defaults to Bezier mode, and Bezier mode allows you to create those nice curves that I showed you before by clicking and dragging. However, our tool doesn't support that. So to make this work with our tool set, the one that we're going to build in this course, you should set the curve node to polygon mode instead, and then it should work just fine. Okay, so that's the two rules you need to adhere to. One, you need to draw polygon curves, and two, make sure you only draw one curve and that you add to your curve instead of creating new ones, because we won't be able to properly support multiple curves. Okay, good. At this point, I think we've covered enough of the curve 2.0, so you know what you're doing with it. Of course, you can always check the help file if you want to know more information about this node. Just like any other node in Houdini, the help file is very thorough and very useful, so feel free to check this one out. But for now, let's head over to Unreal and quickly discuss some of the bugs that are still present in this version of Houdini 19 that I'm currently using, so you don't end up getting stuck on them when you're following this course. Now, there are still a couple of bugs present in the Houdini engine for Houdini 19, and unfortunately, in this version of Houdini, they have not been fixed yet. Now, in order to prevent you from getting stuck on them, I have to mention them in this video. If they do get fixed in the future, and I notice, I will try to cut them out in the video, so you won't even see this section. And the first bug that I want to address is that the collision on our building is actually broken. Unfortunately, in this version of the Houdini engine, when we generate a model that uses the collision_geo group, which normally results in it being assigned a collision mesh, and if we look inside of the model viewer for our generated model, this is still present. We can see it right here. However, this mesh is not used because in this version of Houdini, the collision complexity is not set properly. For it to actually work, it would have to be set to use complex collision as simple. And at the moment, that is not what's happening. At the moment, it's being set to project default. And that's because in this version of Houdini, they actually fixed that always on collision bug that was present in the previous version of Houdini that made it so that every model generated by Houdini actually had collision. So they fixed that bug, But unfortunately, they introduced a new one in doing so. And that means that if we currently try to play, we are literally just going to walk straight through our building. Yeah, that's not ideal. So there is a workaround around this issue. Unfortunately, it's not a very good one. We'd either have to go to our model, and we would have two models being generated, right, besides the visualizer. We would have our main building and our collision mesh. If we go to our main building model, we click on that and we go to the collision tab, then over here we can set collision complexity to use complex collision as simple. If we do that and we save, then our building will have collision. And all these visualizers still wouldn't have them because they're a separate model. So that will actually fix that issue. However, if we regenerate this model, that change will be lost. So this is not a permanent solution. But if you were to bake out this model and then set up your collision properly, it would still be fine. Okay, so if we were to bake it here, that would solve the issue regardless. Now there is an alternative method to fixing this problem, and that is if we go to the Edit, Project Settings for Unreal Project. Then if we go to the Physics tab, and then under the Simulations tab, you will find Default Shape Complexity. If you set this one to use complex collision as simple, then your tool will always work. However, I wouldn't advise doing this because this will override your default shape complexity for everything in your Unreal project. This might work if you're trying to test out your tools, but I wouldn't do this in any other project because it will change the behavior all across your Unreal scene. Now, I do hope this bug will be fixed soon. Other collision types like the UCX collision or the simple collision type that we might actually be generating with our models up on the roof does still work. It's just the collision_geo that's currently not assigned properly. And second, there's another bug in this version of the Houdini engine. If we click play and then stop our play, then the Houdini engine session will stop. When that happens, we can no longer cook our tools because the Houdini engine session is not running. If I try to rebuild, it will do nothing. We can fix that, of course, by going up to Houdini engine at the top and click on create session. This will restart the Houdini engine and we can keep using our tools as normal. Again, it's just a matter of waiting until this bug is fixed. Now, before we continue, there's one more thing that I quickly want to cover, and that is that the tabs that we might have in our interface could potentially be broken if you load the tool into Houdini 19's Houdini engine. And that's related to a couple of hidden tabs in our interface. Depending on which version of the tool you're loading, your tabs might still be there, but all your parameters might be outside of them, which is not helping, or your tabs might just not even be there at all. Now, in order to fix this, we can go to Houdini, go to the type properties, and then in here, if we minimize all of our tabs, and then click on show invisible parameters, we still have the transform and the subnet folder right there. And these come standard with any object level digital asset. Now in this case, I've made them invisible so they don't bother us. But in Unreal, in this new version of the Houdini engine, it appears to break. So in order to fix this, simply make them visible again. You can put them at the end of your tabs, or you could potentially even put them in their own folder, and then maybe call this one node settings or something. But basically, if we apply this change and then go back, we can reload our tool and rebuild. And now, if everything went right, all of our settings should be back in their correct folders. And over here on the right, we now have our node settings, the transform and the subnet, but at least our tool is no longer bugging out. And then last, before we close up this video, I quickly want to cover the topic of the OTL Scanpath one last time. So in the last video, I explained that the main asset of our tool, the foundation building tool, uses 3 utility assets which are components of the main tool. Basically, if this tool cannot find these assets, it won't work properly. For one, we won't have textures, the objects on our roof won't space themselves properly, and other parts of the building won't have any depth to them. They'll just be flat planes or flat surfaces. Basically, the tool will break. So, how do we normally make sure that these assets are loaded? Well, by default, your Houdini tool will know where on your hard drive these utilities were located when you last saved the tool. So in other words, if we were to have a quick look at this in a diagram, under normal circumstances, your main HDA, the tool that you will drop into the Houdini engine, will know where these files are located in its main definition. However, if you were to load this into Unreal, it will load the HDA, and then the HDA will tell Unreal where these files were located on your hard drive, and then it will load those too. However, these file paths are hard-coded, and if you receive my example files, those file paths will not be the same for you as they were for me. Basically, the location where these files were located when I saved the HDA the last time will not be the same. So in other words, Unreal will not be able to find them, right? And if it can't find these files, then the tool will break. So how do we go about fixing that? Well, we can use the OTL Scanpath to look for these files in a different location than that they were originally saved in HDA. So the OTL Scanpath in Houdini is basically a location on your hard drive that you're pointing Unreal to look for these particular assets. The same assets with the same name that your main HDA is going to be looking for. And if it finds them, it will treat it as a replacement for these utilities. So you can load them from a specific location on your hard drive and it will still work. So if we want to do that in Unreal, we have to go up here to Houdini Engine, go to the plugin settings, and then scroll down to the bottom, and here you will find the OTL search path, right? Now in here you can then provide a file location for your HDAs. Now you can either provide the file location for this folder here in Unreal, and if you do that, then you need to make sure that your HDA files are located in that folder as well. So I'm going to quickly right click here and say show in Explorer, and then you will get the folder that I provided to you with the HDA files, both the commercial and indie versions of these files, and you will find the Unreal asset file, which is actually the wrapped up asset that Unreal generated when we dropped the assets into our content browser. Now the problem is that the OTL Scanpath does not know how to read Unreal asset files. So pointing the OTL Scanpath only to these files will not allow the Houdini engine to see them. So you won't be able to use them to run your tool. You have to point the OTL Scanpath to the HDA files that you want the Houdini engine to use. Now you could also load up the Houdini folder. You could also go back, let's go out, and then assign it to the folder where your Houdini project is located. So basically your HDA folder in your Houdini project. If you point the OTL Scanpath there, then whenever you make a change in your Houdini project, it will automatically allow Unreal to see those changes, which means that you don't have to worry about having to import these into Unreal all the time. Now, during the course, we are going to update our main asset several times over. And when we do that, we'll also have to update the main asset here in Unreal. Basically, re-import it from that location on the hard drive. Now, if you hover over one of these assets, you can actually see where Unreal is going to try to find the file that it needs to update from. So as long as that's pointing to the asset that you're saving out here in Houdini, in the Houdini folder, then this will always update. Otherwise, you have to probably drag it in and replace it. The utility files don't have to be re-imported per se. Since they are found by the OTL Scanpath, we don't technically have to worry about this. But I am going to import them anyway, and whenever I make a change, I'm also going to import them and make sure that they're stored in my HDA content folder as well. If anything, just to make sure that everything is archived in my Unreal project. And then last, if you want to have more than one folder where Unreal is going to look for your assets, then you can do that by adding a semicolon in the string that defines your path. So if you go to Unreal and you go to the OTL search path, then you can provide the string where your HDAs are stored. And then if you press semicolon and then add another string behind that, then you can have 2 folders or more where it will look for your files. So that can be useful if you happen to store them in multiple locations. But okay, I just wanted to reiterate on this and make sure that you know exactly how Unreal finds your files. So if something is wrong with your tool, then you can solve it for yourself. So with this, you should now be ready to start following the foundation course with Houdini 19, and you should be able to follow it without any issues. If you do encounter problems or you get stuck, don't forget that you can also go to the eHoudini Academy Discord channel and you can always ask questions there. And that in general goes for any questions that you have regarding the foundation module. I'm generally always available on my Discord channel, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them over there. For now, let's get started with video 2 of the foundation module, and I hope you find this very interesting. I have a lot of stuff coming up in these videos. We're going to be covering the basics of Houdini nodes. We'll be covering how to set up collisions and bring it into Unreal. And it is true that collisions in this version of Houdini are slightly broken. I expect them to be fixed, so what I teach you should still hold true. We're also going to cover how to set up instances, build up the framework that we need to install our elevators and staircases. We're going to texture our building. We're going to build some advanced models, procedural models for the staircases and the elevators. And then finally, we're also going to cover how you can do optimization in Houdini in order to make these tools run faster. And that's why I actually improved my example files, because we did actually cover more in the final video lectures that I didn't cover in the first version of the example files. So with that, thank you for watching this video, and I hope it has prepared you properly to start the foundation course. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.